Hello and welcome to a quick rundown of my notes and thought processes behind the second WdKA home assignment. For this home assignment, I chose the topic outside versus inside. Since the assignment asked us to explore a place, I started listing down physical and metaphorical places which had emotional value to me. After doing that, I started to write down my first few ideas. The first one was a scripted short film, the second a short montage, the third a handicraft model, the fourth an illustrated diptych, and the fifth a skeleton and human model. After this, I started to go over each idea carefully. The short film would basically focus on me going through different places outside and then going back home. This would show a shift in mood and also show different emotions. The storyline would be simple and it would mostly be camera work and editing, but it was a very common idea. The short montage would just be a collection of all of my home videos together, and it would show a lot of different memories and a lot of different emotions. But it barely had me doing anything and it would only show my editing skills. So I wasn't too keen on this idea. The next idea was craft work. It would basically be a small model showing different memories and different feelings. I was planning to use a lot of different materials, and I was keen on this idea because it related more to my field, which was illustration. The next idea was an illustrated diptych, which would basically show two images, one for outside, one for inside. The next idea was a skeleton versus human model. It was just a very literal take on the outside versus inside line. I wasn't too keen on this idea because I had already used clay for the previous assignment and it didn't really have any relation to the topic. I took some time to list down all the things that I wanted to show or tell in this project, which was basically many materials, different emotions, the introverted and the home life, craft and videography, and the quiet person and many emotions parallel. I started to cross out the ideas that I didn't like. The first was the short montage, probably because it didn't make me do any work and it didn't show any of my skills. The second was the human and skeleton model. It wasn't really creative and there was no concept, only copywork. And it would have been risky too because it was only sculpture and that takes a lot of time. Next, I started planning my remaining ideas. For the short film, I wrote down a synopsis and I wrote down the characters and locations and camera equipment that I will be using for this idea. Again, the synopsis is pretty simple. It's basically just me going through a normal day around my house, and then I go outside and it shows a shift in mood from when I'm at home, which is relaxed, and when I am outside, which is stressed. And it would be filmed in such a way that the camera would only show my face at the very end. And here's a little storyboard I drew for the film. Here's me just planning out the basics of the craft work, which is ultimately the idea that I did land on. I'm just deciding on the base and what each emotion will be represented by. And I was trying to list other places I could include, except I'm quite an introvert and I don't really like going outside. And here I'm trying to fit each emotion into a container in the jewelry box, just trying to plan it out. For the illustrated diptych, I had actually two ideas, and here are my two sketches of the ideas. The first idea was me as a baby scribbling on the walls with some paint on one side, and on the other side, me as an adult painting an art piece on the wall. The second idea was just a half of my face with one side showing a different emotion than the other one. After all that, I had a third idea, which was not a diptych, but it was just an illustration. The idea was the merged image of a house and a heart, and these were the two designs I was looking at. The idea was my favorite place was my home, and I kept my home very close to my heart. Halfway through, I crossed out the short film idea because it wasn't really related to illustration. I then started to plan the craft work in detail, with sketches. These were the first front and back side sketches. It was basically a model of my face, and when flipped over, it would show a dollhouse kind of structure with each room having a different emotion. And each emotion would be represented through a different material. The second design of the idea was a little different. Instead of a model of my face, I decided to add collages of portraits of people from all across the world. Apart from that, I started to list down the different materials I would use for each emotion. I decided to add a portrait collage because I had already used clay modeling for my previous assignment, and this would go with the rest of my project. Going back to the illustration idea, here's a more in-depth sketch on how I wanted it to turn out. It was a sketch of a simple house with the veins of a heart coming out of it as though it was pumping blood. Concept was to illustrate the saying, "Home is where the heart is," and it was supposed to be done on Procreate. Then I decided to take the shape of an actual heart and merge it in with the house. I was also planning on giving it a stand and a glass casing. I actually did move ahead with the illustration idea, and I did finish it, but I thought the product was too simple and I didn't want to submit that as my final project. But here's what it looks like. Coming back to the crafting project, I started to finalize some more details, such as the front, back, and side. At that time, I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted my front and back side to look like, so I was just focusing on the actual sides. The sides were going to be black with brick-like patterns painted on it with a brown and cream blend. And these are some small sketches of each side. I then realized that I hadn't thought about anything for the top of the project. I was debating on giving it a chimney with antennas or just writing the topic name on it. Just then I thought of making a fake brain and adding that to the top. I was going to make it with a bottle and some cotton balls. Then I went along with the brain matter idea and I came up with some small designs which would help accompany that. Here's a top view of the brain with the spinal cord and nerve endings coming out of it. And here is a side view of the brain with the nerves reaching below. I was still debating on how I should do these designs. There was a slight problem with this project, and the problem was it was too dark. Since all of it was inside of a box, it needed some sort of illumination. At first, to fix this problem, I decided to cut off a part of the ceiling. When that didn't work, I thought of covering it with some LED lights. And there were two ways in which I could attach the lights. Only the battery of the lights were quite big and I didn't know where to put them. That's when I realized I could bundle up most of the lights into the brain and use the battery as the brain stem. The lights inside and coming out the brain would be its nerves and neurons. Finally, here's a little bit about my idea and the concept behind it. The place I had chosen to explore was the home I had created inside of my mind. It was created there in the first place because I am extremely introverted and I spend most of my time keeping to myself, staying inside of my own mind. But despite not saying much and keeping to myself, I am a very emotional person, and here is an inside look at the emotions running around inside my head. Since there are so many introverts out there who share the same experience, I decided to make the front side of the house a collage of many people's portraits. And that marks the end of my notes for my assignment 2, Outside versus Inside. Thank you so much for going through these notes and for going through the rest of my application process for WdKA. Goodbye and have a wonderful day.